Okay, and share screen.
Yes. Oh, excellent. All right. So let's say the bracha. Baruch atah Adonai
Right.
Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tivanu la'azok b'divrei Torah. Amen. All right. So we're going to begin at verse 6, right?
Yes.
Okay.
No, it's 7.
Oh, it's 7.
We read 6, but it may make more sense to include 6 again.
Okay.
I think you're right, Stan. And let's see where we're going to stop.
That one ends at 9, and there's another one that ends at 8, and another that ends at 12.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So yeah, let's read through 12. Okay. Can I get a volunteer?
Well, I can. I guess I haven't for a while.
All right.
All right. I'm reading off my tablet, so it should be the same text anyway.
Okay.
The towns that you assign to the Levites shall comprise the 6 cities of refuge that you are to designate for a manslayer to flee to which you shall add 42 towns. Thus, the total of the towns that you assign to the Levites shall be 48 towns with their pasture. In assigning towns from the holdings of the Israelites, take more from the larger groups and less from the smaller, so that each assigns towns to the Levites in proportion to the share it receives. The Lord further spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you shall provide yourselves with places to serve you as cities of refuge, to which a manslayer who has killed a person unintentionally may flee. The city shall serve you as a refuge from the avenger, so that the manslayer may not die unless he has stood trial before the assembly."
Okay. So we have reference here to the common practice in the ancient world of revenge killings.
Right.
Was I don't know if I can say universal, but it was a very widespread practice, and sad to say, still a widespread practice in our world, although its area of action has been circumscribed to some degree. But sad to say, one of the areas where revenge killings are still, can I say popular or common, maybe common is better, is in the Muslim world. This is, and as well as other things like killing for when a family is dishonored and so on and so forth. These are principles which are held up as positive values in the Muslim world. In the West, it is sometimes still practiced. Think of the Hatfields and the McCoys. But even though it exists, it is disapproved of by the majority culture, speaking very broadly. One of the reasons I bring this up is that it is impossible to explain the ongoing animosity and conflict between Israel and its Muslim neighbors without understanding the importance and the frequency of honor killings and revenge killings in the Muslim world. The idea that there is going to be a possible stopping place for ongoing cycles of violence is difficult to understand if one of the parties is always looking to take revenge on the other party. There is no place where the cycle ends. And unfortunately, this is still part of the Muslim world. And not only with regard to Israel, but among Muslim communities and Muslim nations. This goes on ad nauseum. So the question that this leads to initially is what are the steps, if there are any, that we can take to end the violence in the Middle East? What has to happen in order for the ongoing cycle of revenge to stop? And we have not yet come up with a good answer to that question. The initial answer was the at one time burgeoning what do I say secular view in parts of the Arab world, Turkey being at one point a prime example of creating a modern society in which some of these older principles were disavowed. But that brought, as we know, a very strong counter-reaction. And even in places like Turkey, which stood for a long period of time as opponents of some of these older values, they have gradually been reabsorbed into the world of revenge. And especially, I want to add, honor killings. Does everybody understand what an honor killing is?
I was going to ask about that. Was that practiced by the ancient Israelites also?
There is one example in the Torah, it's a fairly powerful example of Dinah, who is raped by one of the opposing groups, and the Israelites are commanded by God to take revenge on the spoilers of Dinah, but it's the only example we have, and that's not exactly an honor killing.
No, because in an honor killing, I think it's that what happened to the daughter brought dishonor to the family, and so the daughter gets killed.
Right. So it kind of crosses the boundary to some degree, but that's the only example we have of any kind of substantial enactment of this kind of value. I think it's important to bear out that one of the reasons that the cities of refuge were established, and again, whether this was effective or not effective, but separate question, was precisely to stop the cycle of retaliation, revenge killings. Not that it ended the desire or the inclination to take revenge, but it simply made it difficult, if not impossible, to enact. And the reason I want to point this out is that often in dealing with the Torah, people are dissatisfied with the idea of certain principles not simply just being prohibited. Why don't we just prohibit slavery? Why don't we just prohibit a whole variety of things, including taking revenge? And the answer is that the Torah's view is both pragmatic and incremental. The way you end behavior like this is not by jumping from A to Z, but from A to B, and from B to C, and from C to D. And the idea is to create an inexorable rhythm of change, so that at each point we are asked to extrapolate from the latest change what the next position will be. I say it's pragmatic because it is it's pragmatic in the same way that the American Revolution was pragmatic and the French Revolution was not. You know, you can say, all right, we are now going to outlaw the calendar, but that doesn't really help much since the calendar is so ingrained in people's minds. You can have a guillotine. Does that stop crime or especially crime against the state? Well, actually, no. It just enshrines it in a new technology, which the guillotine was at the time. And now it transfers the actor from the individual or the community to the state. So it really doesn't do any of that kind of thing. The idea of trying to stop the cycle of violence requires something much more powerful, but less ambitious than simply prohibiting or outlawing certain kinds of things. So on the whole, I would say the biblical approach is frustrating for many people because they think, well, why don't we just end the practice? But in actuality, it is the more effective method. And so we have to live with what? With incompleteness. If the changes we would like to make take longer, and they are more gradual than we would like them to be. Now you can say, well, that's a real problem because we have in mind what we would like the principle or the value to be. And we are therefore living constantly in a state of cognitive dissonance. What we would think the ideal situation should be and where we live are two different places. A question would be, wouldn't it be better if they were not two different places? That where we want to be and where we are were the same. At first blush, we would say, yeah, that would be wonderful. Except that the process of dynamic development ends because there is no end to the possibilities of injustice that we have to confront. And so the idea of maintaining the motion, the energy behind continual reevaluation and revision is important. And the only way that happens is if the changes are incomplete. And I know that doesn't make anybody happy to hear that, but it's the only way that in my opinion, it works. So I want to connect this idea of maintaining the dynamic movement of change toward justice or towards greater values of democracy or life-affirming values, whatever, as being inherent in the process of what we'd call redemption. That is to say, the world is not redeemed in one, as my old high school math teacher used to say, in one swell swoop. But it happens because we are driven to it by the state of society and the gap between the state of society and what we think of as the ideal. If that gap didn't exist, the process of movement would cease. In fact, if you look at the history of revolutionary activity, this is exactly what happens. Again, the French Revolution is a good example that at a certain point, the move towards justice becomes ossified. And the methodology that the extremists like Robespierre and Danton and so forth, becomes enshrined as the goal itself. And once that happens, progress stops and it becomes counter-revolutionary. Yeah, Judy.
So I was wondering about the concept of messianic redemption.
Uh-huh.
So this, in a way, could be interpreted as a kind of a perspective can be that messianic redemption happens through these gradual, incomplete changes, movements towards justice and towards redemption. So it doesn't really happen in one fell swoop, like
No.
the Messiah is here, and therefore justice will be for everyone, and everybody will be, there will be no more honor killings, and no one will commit crimes, and so on and so forth. So the Orthodox view, I guess, would, how would they look upon the very thing that the Torah recommends, which is, incremental and pragmatic and so on?
Well, they're looking at it from a different point of view. And we're talking about what the Orthodox might prescribe as the solution to these problems. It represents one side of the Jewish view. It's the side that is represented by saying we would like intervention to end this process and jump from A to Z.
Uh-huh.
And having that aspiration is one thing, but how do you in fact enact it?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is the Orthodox tradition has, generally speaking, not been on the side of radical intervention, but of halakha, of law, of the gradual evolution of moral principles, of justice and so forth through this gradual process. Yes, Dan.
But what about the Haredim in Israel, the religious police and that sort of thing? Isn't that sort of jumping ahead?
Well, that is an excellent question. And if you really want to hear my rant on the Haredim, I'll be glad to give you a short version of it. I think this is what happens when people forget that there is a larger context to what they're reading in scripture. The Haredim are among those who believe they know exactly where they're going. The jump from A to Z takes them. They think they know what Z is. But of course, by definition, they can't know that. So that they get into lots of trouble, and they get the rest of us into lots of trouble because they think they're sort of like Danton and Robespierre, all these other guys, with their guillotines and so on and so forth. At this stage, that's the ultimate. And they forget that there is a difference between the state of being and the state of perfection.
Yeah, but yeah. I must say that my view of the Haredim may be colored because I read the weekly newsletters from the Israeli Religious Action Center, Iraq.
Oh, well, look, there are all sorts of views along these lines. You think about the reform of what used to be called the Justice Center, was it? David Sternberg was the head of it. I mean, there are all sorts of people have opinions about what a just society ought to look like, and they can all find scripture to support those views. Now, this is one of the many places where I think that Shakespeare is very wise and we ought to pay attention. namely that the devil can cite scripture to his own purpose. And that seems to me to be true. It's not as if, some of these retrograde Haredim, whether they're Jewish Haredim or Christian Haredim, are feel themselves to be entitled to describe and to hold to account everybody based on their own particular view of where the process of development ends. This is arrogant and not, in my opinion, consonant with the process of Torah. But then I'm a Reformed rabbi, so I don't count. I mean, it just strikes me as being a little odd. But I want to uphold the importance of this, because the gap between the state of being and the ideal state is what's crucial here, in my view. And this idea goes all the way back to the 19th century and the Neo-Kantian philosopher Hermann Cohen, who I recommend that everybody read if you want to know what a modern Judaism actually looks like. Hermann Cohen, as a he was the father of Neo-Kantian philosophy, and he wrote very powerfully about the implications of Kantian philosophy for law and for religion. And his point of view was that there is always a gap between where we are and where we would like to be, and that was invaluable. That gap is what created the dynamism of legal, moral change in the world. And what he argued also was that was inevitable and eternal. There was no point at which that gap would ever disappear. And we should be thankful for that. Yeah, Sam.
Yeah, I was just going to say that leaves an opening for Tikkun Olam also, because even though the gap will never disappear, it's incumbent upon us to work to try and narrow it.
Yes, and I think that Cohen's point, from a neo-Kantian point of view, is that this is one way that he understood what Kant called the categorical imperative. That is to say that the gap required certain kinds of views, certain kinds of behavior on the part of the humane citizen. And for that reason, it was an inevitable and positive part of the process. It's not something you want to get rid of. It's something you have to recognize is ineradicable for a good reason. Yeah, Sam.
After the session is over, can you email us the link, or at least the bibliographical reference to the book, so that we can look it up?
Well, I'll give it to you right now. I mean, his major work in the area of Jewish neo-Kantian philosophy is called The Religion of Reason Out of the Sources of Judaism.
All right, can somebody put that in chat or something? Because I don't, with my hearing aids, it's easier for me to do it if I can read it, that's all.
Yeah, okay. I don't know how to do this exactly.
I'll do it.
The Religion of Reason Out of the Sources of Judaism. But there's a much shorter book, which is a kind of epitome of his philosophy. Quotations from various writings is called Reason and Hope. That's kind of the an easier way to get into it if you're not, already a neo-Kantian philosopher. But Reason and Hope is sort of the more accessible way. The major work itself is Religion of Reason out of the sources of Judaism. It's really a fascinating book. He takes all these principles of neo-Kantian philosophy and finds their roots in the Torah text. It's really quite stunning. Anyway, so where we are right now is point one, to recognize how the gap between the state of being and the state of the ideal state is a positive dynamic, but also how it is meant to end honor killings and revenge and so on and so forth. So having said that, you have to take another step. And the next step is, how do we live in a world in which revenge is still a value? That is a problem for all of us who are modern human beings and modern Jews. And it's one that the state of Israel struggles with daily. Yeah, Judy.
Well, what comes to mind, of course, and I'm not offering it necessarily as a universal solution, but has been offered, which is turn the other cheek.
Yeah.
Instead of an eye for an eye. And where does it come in? An eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, this stuff that further encourages the kind of.
Well, it depends on how you read that text. And as the rabbis read it, it is exactly the opposite of what you think it means. The point is that the response, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, so on and so forth, sets up a limit to what you can do in response to an evil action. You cannot take more than an eye. You cannot take more than a tooth, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry?
I understand.
Yeah, so that's point number one. And this is especially important when you consider that any of these principles, especially taking of life, is an absolute principle. You can't take an absolute principle and extrapolate it. The whole Kantian view is that an ethical principle is one that has to be universalizable. And there are some of these that are not. You can't make them universal principles because they become self-contradictory. Having said that, it's also important to bear in mind that as the rabbis understood that particular text, the point that they make is that they were never enforced in actuality, that they are principles of equality. That is to say, that the act and the retribution or the response to the act have to be commensurate. Somebody, it's like the old thing, taking an elephant gun to shoot a fly. You can't do that. Your response has to be commensurate.
Mm-hmm.
So, if the damage done to you, the hurt that you encounter is X, you're not entitled to respond with X plus 1. That in and of itself is an important principle. That is to say, that when it comes to damages, when it comes to what to do about the incurring of damage, there is a limitation that is placed on the injured party. There are lengths to which you may not go in order to respond, even though you might be inclined. Yeah, Ken.
I'm just curious if Jesus's turn the other cheek seems to take it even one step further. But you probably have another take on that.
Well, first of all, it's not Jesus's. It's from the book of Deuteronomy. So it is something that gets attributed to Jesus because he quoted it, but it's not original with him. That's point number one. Point number two is, what is it that's being said when you say, turn the other cheek? What is it? What's the principle? Anybody want to take a stab at that? Yeah.
I think what that meant to me
Yeah.
is you put a stop when you turn the other cheek. Basically, you're stopping the person who is trying to offend you by offering peace.
Okay. And how does that affect peace, do you think?
To me, when you bring your other face and you're offering to be hit, to be sacrificed, it will make the other person think otherwise. It's like in a simpler term, maybe bringing an olive branch, but I think turning the other cheek is a lot powerful action to make the other person think a different way.
You know, sometimes I speak as if I'm a very nuanced thinker. And other times, what I have to say is remarkably simplistic. And here's one of those cases. How many cheeks do you have?
2.
I have 4.
What? Wherefore? You're talking about your rear end as well?
We have, my husband, we have 2, and then we have twins. So we have 4 children.
Yeah. Well, children are not related to this. If somebody strikes you on the cheek, you have one other cheek, you can offer them to strike. The point is, there's this limited number of cheeks. You can't go on forever finding new cheeks to strike. So the point is, when you turn the other cheek, what are you saying to the person who has struck you on the first cheek?
Well, I'm a Christian, and
Yeah.
and when I think about that teaching, like you said, it came from the book of Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
It's basically, to me, offering yourself to the other person and willing to be hit.
But why do you do that? What is the point? Why is it effective? What is the meaning? Why would turning the other cheek be helpful? Stan?
Well, you've got a cycle that could start in terms of revenge.
Yes.
And at least for one turn of the face, you've stopped that. And also, sometimes things are done in anger that if you take a moment to consider it, I overreacted. And so it gives an opportunity for that to happen. Say someone says something, you interpret it the wrong way, and you consider it an insult or something like that.
Yeah.
If you take a moment to think about it, they may have intended something entirely different.
Mhm.
They may have. But let's say even in the worst case, they meant exactly what you thought it meant. Okay. And it was a nasty comment and so forth. In the act of turning the cheek, what are you saying, Judy?
That there's a limit. There's
Yeah.
only one, other cheek. There's a limit to the cycle.
You get one free shot out of anger,
Yeah.
and that's it. You don't get 2 or 3 or 4. You get 1, because we recognize that anger, like many other emotions, can be spontaneous, and we may not succeed in controlling or directing or managing it. But you only get that once. The second time, you should be able to do better. Now, the question is, and this is where, I don't know if this is what Kim had in mind, this is where Judaism and Christianity part company. The question is whether or not the person who acts out of anger gets that one free shot or not. Do you get to strike the first time or not at all? And the question comes down to this. There are all sorts of actions that we take which have questionable moral value, but are inbred in our psychologies and are in fact ineradicable. What do you do with them? Human beings lie. All human beings lie. Is the answer to say you may never lie? Well, that's what Kant tried to do. It didn't work out so well. But what do you do with the fact that people are inclined to lie? Well, you can't make a habit out of it. That can't become a principle that you universalize. You make a mistake once and you lie, that's as far as it goes. Should we try to abolish all lying? Well, I think we all can come up with examples where lying is preferable to telling the truth. I'll give you a good example. If you have ever been married and your husband or your wife says, "So does this new suit or dress make me look fat?" What do you say? Well, I think the rabbis would say the answer is no, of course it doesn't make you look fat. You look beautiful or handsome. Why? Because there is a competing value called shalom bayit, peace in the house. And if you say, well, now that you mention it, it does make you look fat, you're going to be sacrificing the shalom bayit principle very easily. You can't, it's rare when there is an unambiguous moral position. So you have to create a situation in which it's possible to end the process in a relatively benign way. So you say, no, it doesn't make you look fat. In fact, you look terrific. All right, Stan, what?
In my family, we called those little white lies.
Little white lies, yeah. And sometimes you're not only entitled to use them, there's a moral reason to use them.
Yes, Rabbi. I think I'm gonna, when I think about Nazi Germany, those people who took Jews in their home and the Gestapo stopped by, they lied. Like you said, the moral value of loving the life of these people is far more important following, I'm not going to lie. So
that's a very good point, because that's exactly what I'm talking about. That the lie was in service of a much greater truth. So it happens all over the place. The United States, what is the verse from the song, "Home of the free and the brave"? Well, Sometimes, yes, but sometimes not. But it's aspirational. We want it to be, pardon me, the home of the free and the brave. We want that to be who we are. And even though we're not that completely, that's the principle to which we aspire. But you don't say it, well, someday we'll be like that. You say that is how we are. That's who we are. Yeah, Judy.
So I'm just wondering, when you made the distinction where Judaism and Christianity part company in that perspective,
Yeah.
could you kind of sum that up? What you see in that difference?
Well, in my view, and it's just my view, there are two possible directions you can take. One is to prohibit the immoral or the morally questionable behavior and to suppress it. The other is to recognize its existence and make a relatively benign place for it. Judaism is inclined to the latter view. Christianity, in my view, is inclined toward the former view. And one way you can see this is in the view of the New Testament towards sexual relations. And the attitude of St. Paul, for example, is, look, if you can do without having sexual relations altogether, that would be best. But if you can't, here's the conditions under which you can do it. Judaism's view is sexual relations are a good thing, as long as they are not carried too far. There are limits. But within those limits, it's a good thing. It's not a negative thing, which ideally ought to be suppressed, but a good thing that should be cultivated and turned toward good ends. So looking at it from that point of view, Christianity's idea and Judaism's idea are very different. Does that help? Yeah, Stan.
I was thinking of the example of prohibition.
Oh, okay. What do you want to say about prohibition?
Well, I just, alcohol is bad. We're
Right.
going to prevent it all over. We passed the constitutional amendment, and obviously it brought in a period of lawlessness around sneaking in alcohol and speakeasies and all of that.
Right.
And we changed that in the 1930s by the next amendment.
Revoking the Volstead Act. Right. Yeah, that's true. And I guess the thing to say about that is one can understand the position that it would be best just to suppress it, just to outlaw it. And unfortunately, there is that inclination exists even today, even in political arguments that I would find and others would find very positive. So, for example, all the jokes about political correctness are based upon exactly this point, that we really should outlaw certain kinds of speech, certain kinds of names or terms, or certain kinds of language, because they are wrong. I wouldn't disagree with that entirely, but I don't believe that you can do that entirely. I don't think you just sort of turn around and say, everybody must not say this. Everybody must not express this. I think it's a gradual process, which is where the humor comes in. People don't approach it as a process which requires improvement, but as some kind of absolute and a suppression of what's wrong. Yeah, Judy.
So I hear what you're saying, Kerry. I've always had trouble with this principle because,
Yeah,
you know, I'm thinking of racism, anti-Semitism, sexism, and where do you draw the line? when you make jokes about any ethnic group,
Yeah.
from Asian to Italian to Jews to Poles, Nazi Germany's beginnings, and eventual, sort of destruction of a community. Speech is very powerful.
Yes,
And-
I agree with you completely. The question is, how do you get from point A to point B, point C, and so on down the road? So, for example, there was a brouhaha a number of years ago about a statement put out, I think, by UC Berkeley. I think it was UC Berkeley. It might have been some other school, talking about the chinks in the armor of the moral position of the university. And they came in for tremendous criticism because they used the word chinks,
Right,
not to refer to Chinese, but the word chink as in an imperfection,
right,
part
right.
of our language. Okay.
Right.
Now, there are two things that are going on here. One is, were there people who were legitimately offended by that? Well, yeah, there were. At the same time, language grows and changes. And there's all sorts of ways in which we use words now that we would never have thought to use 50 years ago, both in a good way and in a not so wonderful way.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, we used to have the expression that was used regularly to Jew someone down,
Right,
to negotiate with them in an unscrupulous sort of way.
right.
And so we have largely gotten rid of that expression, except in Alabama and places like that. But at the same time, my father, may he rest in peace, used to refer to a Yiddish cup,
Yeah,
a Jewish head.
yeah.
What did that mean? Well, what he meant, and what others who use the expression meant, is that there was a Jewish way of thinking, a Jewish way of understanding things, which was maybe unique, certainly particular to the Jewish community. You could look at that and say that other people were defective because they didn't have this. Well, you could look at it that way. But that isn't, when my father used the expression, that's not what he meant. What he meant was that somebody had a point of view or a way of thinking that came out of the Jewish tradition. And so had a Yiddish cup.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Should we do away with the expression Yiddish cup? Well, you could make the argument that we should. On the other hand, we'd lose the positive meaning, which is a meaning supporting the particular qualities of Jewish culture.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there are so much depends upon intention
Mm-hmm.
and purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the difficulty, as I see it, as sensitive as I am to your point, Judy,
Mm-hmm.
is the intemperance that some people display to immediately jumping towards the most negative construction of a word or an expression, when in fact that may not be what is in anybody's mind. But you're right, drawing the line is hard to do. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. The idea that's very tempting is to draw the line wherever we are at the moment and say, that's it, thus far and no further. But in the end, there is no such place. Now, for example, very commonly today on college campuses, people continue to do what they used to do, which is at the first meeting of the class, you go around the room, and people introduce themselves. Okay. One of the ways that an increasing number of people introduce themselves is to tell the class what pronouns they would like to be referred to as. Would they like to be he or she or they, which is increasingly popular? Now, this, to my ears, sounds strange. I understand where it comes from. Will it, in fact, become an operative change in the English language? Well, it might. And then again, it might not. I remember the wars about Ms. early in the 70s, and people were saying, "Oh, no one will ever use Ms." But we use it. Not universally. People still use Miss and Mrs., but Ms. has its place. I don't know where these things go, but I'm saying that it seems to me to be harder and harder to figure out where the line is. And as things change and develop, it gets even more difficult than it was the day before. I wish there were an easy way to solve this, a principle way to that's the spot. That's the spot where we stop the arguing about these things. But I haven't found out what that is yet. The only thing that works is to try to speak in as reasonable and kindly and tender a way as you can, so that people recognize that whatever you say comes out of a positive space and is not meant to have ill intent. And beyond that, I don't think there's much you can do. So, but that's just my point of view. So I know we're at the end of our time. We have a couple of minutes. So let me make one last point before we close for today. One of the things that we have not addressed yet, and it's related to this idea of a city of refuge, is the increasingly popular practice of creating safe zones, especially on college campuses, where people are not allowed to use certain language or to express certain opinions because other people take offense. In the recent months at UC Berkeley, and maybe Kim will help to explain why UC Berkeley is the place where this stuff happens most often. There was quite an argument about the question of the abridgment of freedom of speech when a certain white supremacist speaker had been invited to campus. And the question was, could such a person come to campus? Could he say, it had to be he, say whatever he wanted to say? If he was going to use certain kinds of language, did that mean that some kind of protective zone or bubble had to be created so that some people would not hear what he had to say and not therefore take offense at his language? It was a huge controversy. And in the end, he was invited to campus, but he didn't speak at the main area of campus. It was up in some building in the hinterlands of the campus. But think about it from the other point of view. Let's say that we're in 1930s Germany, and Hitler is making some of the speeches that he was making in 1935 and 36 and 37, and saying things about Jews, and not just about Jews, about other groups as well. with no limit to what he could say. That's an extreme example, especially because his opinions were connected with the power of the state to enact a program. You know, whatever you want to say about the administration of the University of California at Berkeley, they're not in a position to enact any kind of social or political program based on the speech of anybody on the campus. But we do have those kinds of examples. And what would we say about what to do about the kind of outrageous speech that a Hitler would spew? You know, one of the classic comments in relation to this is the quotation that people bring up from Justice Brandeis, that the only cure for bad speech is more speech. And which is a wonderful position, as long as it's not you whose ox is being gored. You understand? So again, this is a perennial dilemma, and I don't have any easy solutions, and I don't think the Jewish tradition does either, except to say that we get to say what we want and to accept the inevitability of criticism that will ensue. Yeah, Judy, you get the last word.
I get the last word?
You get the last word.
Okay, so I suppose what I hear you saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that when Hitler spoke in the way he did with such virulency, that is an extreme example, but it does happen and we see it all the time.
Absolutely.
That the cure for that is more speech. And you know, the trick about that, the dilemma about that is that when you are facing a monster like Hitler, there is very little opportunity for success of more speech that could alleviate the situation. But you know, it depends. It was too late then. It was too late then.
Well, but there might have been an earlier time.
But there might have been.
It could have been limited or quashed or whatever. My favorite example of this is when Gandhi was asked about what the Jews of Europe should do about the Nazis. He said, well, you should do what we did in India. You should use passive resistance. Which many people took at the time as being a ridiculous statement. Because dealing with the British, they would respect that kind of principle.
Right, correct.
Dealing with the Nazis, not so much.
Not so much. Correct. Yeah.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed our session today, and we'll see each other, some of us, tomorrow. And otherwise, have a good Shabbos and a good weekend.
Yeah, thank you. Do we meet next Thursday then?
Well,
yeah, it's not New Year's, right?
It's New Year's Eve.
Wednesday is New Year's Eve.
Okay.
So I don't know. It's up to y'all. I mean, I will be glad to meet with you.
Wait, today's the 24th, so it is Thursday. That's New Year's Eve.
Right. So.
But we don't meet tomorrow. We have no Musar because it's Christmas Day. We decided not to.
That's right. Yes.
And we're not going to meet on the 1st either.
Okay, well, you all decide what you want.
Nothing sacrosanct about New Year's Eve, though. So.
Yeah, I have some things that are planned for that day, so I may or may not be able to come. So
let's take a day off. You know, I think Mark is right.
Okay, and we'll meet again on the 7th then.
Yes,
okay.
I think so.
Okay.
Is that okay with everybody?
Fine with me.
Okay. Well, Stan, you're always easy.
Okay. Well, everybody have a happy a New Year calendar year.
Yes.
Happy New Year.
Yes.
Happy
Yeah.
New Year.
Happy New Year, all.
Everyone
Happy New
stay
Year.
safe.
I'll be able to watch all the New Year's bowl games.
Yeah,
with a
there you
clear
go.
Conscience.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank
And
you,
Remy,
Rabbi.
Merry
much.
Christmas.
Did everybody know, is Kirby okay?
I said, Remy, Merry Christmas.
Yes.
Merry Christmas. No,
Yes.
and Happy New Year. And
Same to you.
be safe. And I always say life is a gift, so we'll all enjoy.
There we
Thank
go.
you.
All right, take care,
Thank you.
everybody.
Okay,
Bye.
take care. Bye-bye.